On tonight's Red and Blue, we'll hear from voices on both sides of the issue. First, my conversation with the Consul General of Israel in New York, Dani Dayan. We spoke Wednesday afternoon. So President Trump said his decision was a long overdue step to advance the peace process. What is your reaction to the decision?
He was completely right. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel for 70 years, the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years. Actually, those countries that do not recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel are simply, in so many senses, in the wrong side of history.
The president also said that if both sides want a two-state solution, he will support it. Is a two-state solution still a possibility at this point?
Yes, it's one of the possibilities, definitely. But in order to achieve that or any other solution, the Palestinians have finally to accept to come to the negotiating table. Time and time again, they have an excuse why not to come to the negotiating table. For the last three years, we don't have a negotiation because the Palestinians left the table. Now they are using this and an additional excuse not to come to the negotiating table. Without a negotiation, obviously, we will not find a solution.
Is that Prime Minister Netanyahu's position on this?
Definitely.
According to reports in the Israeli media, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte and the Czech Republic have expressed interest in moving their embassies to Jerusalem as well. Do you expect more countries to follow suit?
I definitely hope so. I hope that countries in many continents, in Latin America, in Africa, will follow suit. You know, Elaine, in some senses, moving the respective embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is as natural as moving a fridge from the bedroom to the kitchen. To the kitchen it belongs. To Jerusalem they belong, the embassies. There they should be.
And to people who would look at this decision and believe that it's the wrong decision, who fundamentally think that this is not, in fact, the best way to achieve the larger goal of peace, what would you say to that?
Well, the president said it very eloquently. He said that for so many years, American administrations did not do, and other countries did not do these steps, but it didn't advance the cause of peace. So why not recognize the reality that Jerusalem is, and Jerusalem will be, also after a peace agreement, the capital of Israel? So why not, even in the sense of, you know, giving illusions to the other side that Jerusalem will not be the capital of Israel. Jerusalem was, is, and will be the capital of Israel. It is very good, also for the sake of peace, to make this clear at this stage.
Some people, as you know, have expressed concern that this move could spark unrest in the region. Is that a concern of yours? Well,
you know, we are talking about societies in the Arab countries that are tightly controlled by the governments. If there are riots, they're not spontaneous. The fact that the Palestinians now close their schools in order for their youngsters, their children, to go to the streets to throw rocks, so the responsibility of the Palestinian Authority, and they should know that if violence will spark, the world, the US and Israel will know who is responsible, the Palestinian Authority, the government, Mr. Abbas. Nothing spontaneous happens there.
As you know, though, some people will say those are demonstrations of people who truly believe that what has taken place is illegal, or what will take place is illegal. What would you say to them?
And nothing more legal than recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Obviously, it's a sovereign decision by the President of the United States that is not illegal. But it's also important to say, Elaine, nothing changed on the ground in the sense that freedom of worship for all religions will prevail. The status quo in all around Jerusalem will prevail. Not because it's an American demand, because it's our belief that freedom of worship for all religions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and others, should prevail in Israel, in Israel's capital. So nothing in that respect changes, and nothing justifies a spark of violence, unless it's violence for the sake of violence, for the sake of killing Israelis.
What would be the expectation on the part of Israel about when specifically this move should have taken place by? Is there a deadline in your mind?
No, there is no deadline. We are not in a position to put deadlines to other countries when and where exactly to locate their embassies. The president spoke about engineers and architects. As a person that himself built a house, know that it takes time.
But what would be reasonable?
The sooner the better.
What would be reasonable? 3 years?
I suppose that's the
4 years?
I think those are the numbers that are being floated, I think. But that being said, the sooner the better. We are already 70 years over them.
And if it takes longer than the 4 years or so that's being talked about now?
It's an American decision. We would like to welcome an American ambassador in Jerusalem as soon as possible, but it's an American decision.
All right. Ambassador Dani Dayan, thank you so much for stopping by, Ambassador. To discuss how Palestinians are reacting to President Trump's decision, let's bring in Yousef Munayyer. He's the executive director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Yousef, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We just heard Dani Dayan. He said the government of the Palestinian Authority would be responsible for any protests in response to President Trump's announcement. What do you make of that comment?
Well, look, I think it's important to understand that Mr. Dayan is a very strong supporter of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory. He has claimed that he supports the idea of a Palestinian state, but he's actually written publicly and in the New York Times, in fact, that he is opposed to the idea of a Palestinian state and wants to keep the status quo of military occupation over Palestinians forever and ever, to continue the building of these settlements in occupied territory, what he calls Judea and Samaria. So people should not be fooled. Mr. Dayan is very much a right-wing extremist and is unfortunately a representative of the Israeli government these days, because that's how far right-wing the Israeli government has gotten. What I'm concerned about, and I think what we should all be concerned about, is not just the violence that may take place as a reaction to this, but the systemic violence that takes place on a routine basis as part of this now multi-decade-long military occupation, Israeli military occupation that is visited upon Palestinians on a routine basis. And I'm most concerned for Palestinians living in Jerusalem, who have been the victims of very specific Israeli policies aimed at re-engineering the demographics of that city to push Palestinians out. These are policies like home demolitions, home evictions, residency revocations, limitations on movement, and so on. And all of these policies and the right-wing politicians that support them, like Mr. Dayan and others in the Israeli government, are now going to be emboldened because they just got a green light from the United States saying that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, what they see as a Jewish state, and they will take that as a blank check to continue these very dangerous policies aimed at pushing the Palestinian population of Jerusalem out.
Let me ask you to elaborate on that. What specifically are you concerned about in terms of the treatment of Palestinians right now since the U.S. announcement by President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital?
Well, I think one of the most troubling things that the president said today in his declaration of recognition was that we have to recognize this as a reality on the ground. But the truth of the matter is, because you have such a dramatic imbalance of power between a very strong Israeli state and a stateless Palestinian people, one side, the Israelis, is the only side capable of creating these realities on the ground. So if there is nobody that is going to restrain them, they will continue to create realities in the form of settlements, realities in the form of pushing Palestinians out of the city of Jerusalem, the infrastructure of military occupation, which is dividing Palestinian populations up and preventing their free movement and the exercise of their rights. And these are not the kind of realities that anybody who wants to see peace and justice should recognize. These are the kinds of realities that people of goodwill should object to very forcefully. And so I think it's very unbecoming of the President of the United States to look at these injustices and recognize them as something that cannot be changed. If anything, the President of the United States should be stating the obvious, the opposite.
How, in your analysis, does this move change the prospects of a peace agreement?
Well, look, you know, the United States has attempted to act as a mediator between Israelis and Palestinians on the principles that were put forward at the foundation of this so-called peace process. One of them being that the United States was going to remain neutral on certain issues, in particular on the status of Jerusalem. And here, the President of the United States today reversed that position, making very clear that the guarantees which underpinned the beginning of this negotiations process have been thrown out the window. So for the very few people who still believed that the peace process mediated by Washington could result in a just peace, they now too must recognize that that is not going to happen. I think what we are going to see instead is growing efforts by civil society internationally to hold Israel accountable through various methods, including nonviolent economic action in the form of international boycotts, continued efforts to divest from Israel's abuses of Palestinian rights, and also the movement to pursue sanctions in various governments around the world on the Israeli state until their violations come to an end.
All right, Yousef Munayyer, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.